Ja? Ja. Ik schrijf een boodschap wat te doen. Ja. Die zit erin.
Dus je moet er doorkijken.
En zou dan sorry?
You know,
Ik heb wel iets van een opvanger schrijven.
the way I want to approach this is
Yeah.
from the point of view of
Ja, juist, klopt. Ja.
the public role of an intellectual, of a
Yeah.
scholar,
Yeah.
even broader as a human being, but
Okay.
and I mean the
No. Nee, hij is niet opnieuw. Eigenlijk zo'n grap nog met de samen.
oh yeah.
Okay.
Should I wait or
Nee.
should I wait or go?
Well, if you want the whole to be recorded, then I would say yes, wait for a minute. Let's figure it out. Oh, zien jullie wel? Ja. Maar kom maar. Ja, oké. Jo. Okay.
Are we okay or not?
Yeah, can you speak?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, this is, yesterday we were talking about some of the major claims made by influential public intellectuals like Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis and so on. And then we went from that to the various issues of historiography and doing history that these broad claims necessarily raise. You can be a very brave academic if you are researching largely marginal issues that are read by a very limited group of people and that relies on really hyper-technical, specialized discourse, right? That's one way to be a very brave academic, because no one reads you, or those who read you are very specialized. And for instance, my book on rebellion and violence, although it sounds very sexy, but if you try to read it, for instance, it's being translated to Arabic. The translators are finding the text so dense that they've been working 10 years on translating the book. And the hyper specialty by which I wrote the book, I diffused all public utility of the text. Now, I'm not going to be disingenuous and say this was an accident. I actually did this at the beginning of my career, and I did it for cowardly reasons. I was dealing with violence, and I didn't want to get a lot of attention, so I wrote a very technical text. And of course, that limited the impact, but made me feel that I've produced serious scholarly work. But on the other hand, the various issues of historiography we were struggling with yesterday, you attempt to take larger questions and especially questions that have that not just cross over regions and historical periods, but even addressing the other. That is really where quite a challenge arises. I mean, it's one thing when I lecture about American law in Egypt. It's a completely different experience than when I speak about American law in the United States. It's an entirely different dynamic. When I speak about American law in the United States, immediately, subconsciously, there is, I know what points are well established, what points are contested, I know what the scholarship, and I am engaging in a discourse that it negotiates its objectives with a high level of expertise and technical knowledge. But of course, when I do it in Egypt, I don't have to work as hard intellectually and in fact, if I make my discourse very technical, I might completely lose my audience, right? Now, it's one solution. A lot of my colleagues are like that. You know, they're typical ivory tower scholar. One solution, I sometimes call the Princeton model. I did my doctorate at Princeton. And at Princeton, you know, you have professors that no one has ever heard of, but they sit in their very nice offices and they research things that no one ever heard of, or work on points of philology, very specific point of philology, or you know, the root of a particular syntax or something like that. That's the other model. Raises a whole host of difficult, and that is the model that engages the public, attempts to actually influence the thought of even the academia at large or even the student body. So I'm not even talking about the public intellectual who writes, for instance, for newspapers. I'm talking about public intellectual who writes books that could be assigned to be read by undergraduates. Now, here I have a nice sort of experiment in thought. In the United States, there's, if you already don't know, there are a lot of political groups that have made it a point to produce a very polarized, very non-compromising discourse about Islam and Muslims in the West, and have intentionally, consistently thought to provoke a reaction by Muslims. And what I have here is one example that perhaps will offend some of you, but you know, that's your role as scholars. You have to deal with, you know. Would they one such group? They purport to have Muslim names. A guy named Mahdi, another guy named Ali, Muhammad Ali, something like that. I've been looking into them, and they turn out that they're not Arab or Muslim, but they are as a group of yuppie Americans that work with a few Persians who are Jewish from the LA community. And they have started calling Bukhari Muslim, particularly these two, but sometimes they also, now for those, just to make sure, you know, all of you know what Bukhari is, right? One of the canonical texts of the Prophet. And Muslim, and they call from Bukhari and Muslim narratives that to the modern ear, if posed, it sounds shocking. And but that's not where it stops. What they do, they produce a quote from Bukhari. Then they turn the quote into very explicit cartoons. And I have a sample here of this is the 10th edition of this cartoon. You'll notice here the name up there is Mahdi Hussein. Mahdi Hussein actually is the false name. It's a Gmail, so you can imagine it took a lot of work from our computer department to try to figure out. You'll find that the recipients is basically everyone in Islamic studies and all Muslim organizations in the United States. And take some time and flip through, because part of it is also showing the Prophet in sexually explicit poses. No, actually, you have to flip through the whole thing because it's a narrative. It's like a cartoon. Take just a few minutes and look at the cartoon. The cartoon claims to represent a historical incident in which the Prophet has a discourse with his wife Hafsa, and his wife Hafsa is purported to object to his sexual relationship with Maria the Copt, which they call the servant of Hafsa, but who is her position is a slave girl, or according to majority scholarly opinion. And then, according to the narrative, the Prophet has sex with Maria the Copt, and Hafsa says, you know, I see that your God serves your sexual desires, and you, as you look through this, let's try to analyze what reactions they are trying to draw. And you, as most of you, I mean, at least three of you, will be going back to Muslim country, Indonesia, and there are many layers of ethical, intellectual, scholarly, academic responsibilities that one is forced to negotiate. In the same way that I remember when I read the Satanic Verses a long time ago, I remember telling a colleague of mine that, I read this novel by Salman Rushdie. I didn't understand the novel, but I sure hope it doesn't get noticed because it. Now, of course, by comparison, now that novel seems benign compared to what goes on today. These cartoons, if the effort is ultimately successful, it is designed to produce a mass explosion that would then engage us in a dynamic which I will follow up in a second with this book, Reflections on the Revolution in Europe, by a fellow called Christopher Caldwell. But do take a look at these cartoons, because I want to analyze them.
Quickly make a couple of copies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, that would I should have thought of that. Yes. One of the images, and it's very quite powerful. Is if you the Prophet Maria, the object of desire by the Prophet, purportedly, is represented in a luscious feminine form. She's not overweight. Her nipples are sticking out, as if she's wearing transparent clothes. She's hot, right? And the Prophet looks like a Hollywood version of an Arab. You know, he has a beard, his hair is long, but he's muscular, he has a muscular body. And he's having sex with Maria doggy style. He has her on her knees, from the back. All of this is intentional part of the symbolism. And it is negotiating the historical narrative itself. Now, as you see this, I want you to think in your own memory. You're all supposed to be specialists on Islam, right?
Yeah.
So I want you to think in your own memory, if you are put on the spot immediately, and Christopher Caldwell, who wrote about the revolution in Europe, says, well, tell me, in what way is this cartoon an inaccurate representation of history? Isn't this, in Bukhari, isn't this true? Hafsa sees the Prophet having sex with Maria and she's upset, and according to the cartoon, it's even more than that. What he says is that the Prophet visits Hafsa, he sees Maria the Copt as a servant girl, he gives her a look, then the cartoon focuses on her body, like he says, wow, she's sexy, good looking, right? So he tells Hafsa, listen, you know, Hafsa is the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the companions. So he tells Hafsa, you know, your father wants you, go talk to your father, right? So Hafsa goes to Umar, and Umar says, I didn't call for you. She comes back home, she finds the Prophet doing Maria, doggy style. In the email that accompanied this, which I didn't print because I thought it was a bit obscene, and forgive me, but you know, all grown-ups, boning Maria is the expression that's used. And she says, oh my God, what is going on here? How can you have sex with my servant? The Prophet says, it's been allowed for me. I can have sex with slave girls. And she says, what is this? Your God just facilitates your lustful urges? And with all type of, if you notice, the woman is posed in either the ugly, fat Arab woman that's stupid, ignorant. At the end she says, oh, we all have to obey Allah, okay, you know, what can I do? Or the sort of the woman in, if you ever saw that cartoon Aladdin, the princess in Aladdin, what was her name?
Something like this.
Huh?
Yes.
Yeah, Jasmine. Yeah. Or, you know, she's sort of a Jasmine-like figure. She looks luscious, sexy, and busty, and so on. But she, what you would, in an erotic image, think she would fit in a harem, where she's sexually submissive, she's smart, she would wait for her savior, you know, the knight on the white horse that would come and kill those Arabs, and ride off with her, if you would dramatize the narrative. Now, and this, notice, is installment 10, titled Heroic Acts of Muhammad. Now, can you imagine installment from 1 to 9 is like what? All of it, by the way, is like this. Now, I want to ask you this. First, as I said, there's so many levels. Islam is one of the main religions. We can all at least agree on some facts. Islam is one of the main religions in this world. It's the faith of at least 1 billion people, right? Now, but at the same time, we have an obligation to history. and historical, the investigation behind historical reality. We also, at the same time, have an obligation towards society, both the national society and human society, world order. First, as a Muslim, how would you start negotiating this? Pretend that you are a professor of Islamic studies. Your students walked in with this, saying, Professor, and let's even make it more realistic. The students say, Professor, I'm born Muslim, but this you could tell that I'm copying things that actually happen all the time in my life. I didn't sleep all night. When I saw this, I was so shocked and disturbed. Is this true? And this is in Bukhari. But I'm so shocked. What do you do? And then you know what is going to follow next, right? The reporters, the newspapers, in my case, Teresa Watanabe from the Los Angeles Times was going to say, is it true? And is it true that Maria was sexy? And is it true, first as a Muslim, before we get to what do you do?
I mean, there are several things that occur to me. One of them is that, one thing that occurs to me is that the Prophet was one of the most biographed, make up the word, religious figures to ever live. I mean, we don't have, for example, Jesus Christ or Moses and any, detailed stories about their lives, where everyone asks them, how do you brush your teeth? And, down to, what time do you get up and how many times, and it occurs to me that of course there's a tradition that Bukhari, these are the most reliable hadith, but there's a part of me which would say, well, all hadith to some degree are up to question, only in varying degrees. That's the only difference. And it seems to me like these kinds of stories also indicate that this is a tradition where criticism from within has been preserved, which is interesting. I mean, similar things have been said about the Hebrew scriptures, that within them there's a criticism of the Jewish people by God, but it's preserved by the Jewish people. And similarly, these famous stories where you have Aisha saying, how quick Allah is to respond to your needs.
Notice something. Notice you said Aisha. You already identified, by the way, a disparity in the historical narrative.
Here, it should be Aisha.
Yeah, here it's Hafsa.
Right.
And
there's already more than one tradition.
That's one narrative.
Yeah.
But in another narrative, it's Aisha, and there's a lot of other. But go on.
And so, there are so many angles to look at it from. It's a bit hard, but I would say that that's one important thing to look at. That Islam has within its texts, some questions already being asked, and that clearly at that time, one would imagine that the Prophet's wife saying something that would be so offensive it would be struck out. But on some level,
censored out. Right.
Yeah, how dare she say that? However important she may be, and yet there is this criticism from within, kind of there, as if to get you to really see the Prophet as a human being. I think there's this constant mental, unconscious comparison to the celibate Jesus Christ going on in Western culture, and a human being has sexual relationships, in a society where marriage is not defined the way it is here, where sexuality is defined differently than it is here. And that's how I would put it. I would say, hadith are up for discussion on some level, always, even if they have very good lineages. They're always something that people discuss, and that there's something healthy about the fact that it exists.
Well, there's yes. This is a very important. Oh, not that tall. Okay, that's good. biographing. Biographing the Prophet. Right. Now, here, you are absolutely right in that there are, for in an academic sense, a founder of a religion, there is a great deal of reports, historical narratives about Muhammad that do not necessarily exist in other traditions. And it definitely is one of the most remarkable things about the Islamic tradition is if you expand even beyond Bukhari, if you go, for instance, to Al-Musannaf of Abdul Razzaq, which predates Bukhari, or Al-Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba, which again predates Bukhari, or to even a massive book of tradition, Jami' al-Sunan wal-Asanid. This book is about 10 times the size of Bukhari. You find competing historical narratives, right? In fact, what you find is a negotiative act, a very dynamic act, in which people are competing for the construction of not just the image of the Prophet, but the normative meaning of the Prophet. One of the questions that I often hear is, why is there no tradition of reductionism in the Quran, for instance? My response is, there is a tradition of reductionism. And you know what is it called? Nasakh, abrogation. The whole tradition of abrogation, we are used to, because again of the way it's been positioned, it's been written about, we are used to thinking of the Quran, we are used to thinking of abrogation as as fundamentally about historical events, as if it is really, they're really narratives about what transpired in history. You know, in the sense that you would write a classic story of incidents and dates. But the remarkable thing about the whole debate about abrogation is the extent to which this debate rested on normative assumptions about the meaning of the text of the Quran, the meaning of the legacy of the Prophet, and the meaning of the Islamic message itself. I'll give you a very obvious example. The satanic verses incident. We all heard about the satanic verses, right? Do you know, in the Shiite tradition, there is in Ja'fari sources in particular, there is a very hostile narrative to the idea that satanic verses were abrogated. And the protest is on thoroughly theological grounds. One of the things that often Shiite polemics of the 3rd century and 4th century Islamic make is look at these Sunnis in their desire to keep the peace or political establishment, have with uncritically accepted narratives that cannot be consistent with the message of Islam. This is a reductionism. In fact, this very, the episode before this had to